Good evening and welcome to the Business of Aesthetics annual expert panel. Tonight, we're tackling a topic that can either unlock your next level of growth or quietly multiply your risk: mergers, partnerships, and expansions. The smart way to grow an aesthetic brand. I'm Don Adisha, and my job tonight is to guide a real practical conversation you can actually use. No fluff, no theory, only answers. This session is being recorded and we'll pull audience questions directly from the chat as we go. So make sure you make the best use of it. Now, whether you're a practitioner, owner, or manager, this conversation is for you if you're considering a partner, exploring expansion, or simply trying to protect what you've built. We'll cover how to identify aligned partners, what due diligence really needs to include in common merger pitfalls, and how to integrate teams and clients without losing trust. Now, this conversation does not have to end in an hour. It can continue on the Business of Aesthetics podcast. We are releasing a new episode every Tuesday. You can find us anywhere you're listening to your favorite podcast from. So just type in Business of Aesthetics and catch us live on Tuesday. Now, before we dive in, let me ask you this. When potential patients in your area search for treatments you offer, does your practice actually show up or are they finding your competitors instead? That visibility gap is a real growth killer. With the right digital strategy, local SEO, targeted ads, and funnel based content, you can attract more inquiries and convert them into booked patients. Stick around to the end because we've got a special gift for you that'll help you get your practice to that next level. That being said, let's introduce our panelists for this session. Seems, um, yeah, I think Robin might be running a bit late. We're not sure exactly. We haven't received an update yet, but we'll we'll hope for the best, and we'll see what happens, and we'll go along. But until then, well, we're not sure what's happening there. But apart from that, we'll just keep continuing. Uh, our panelist over here is Dana Hatch. Dana has lived on the front lines of scale, where strong ideas either become durable systems or die from friction. She's built a reputation for turning complexity into clarity, toolkits, onboarding, training, and performance rhythms that make growth feel controlled instead of chaotic. As an operator and coach in medical aesthetics, Dana helps teams execute at a high level without burning out their people or their margins when they add locations, partners, or even new service lines. With that being said, Dana, welcome to the expert panel.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Fantastic. Next up, we have Dr. Justin Harper. Dr. Harper has scaled what many practices only dream about without turning patient care into a production line. With the physician's lens on safety and outcomes, he's grown Jubilee aesthetics across multiple locations while protecting the standards that build real trust. He's known for building training and oversight systems that let teams expand with confidence. So growth doesn't come at the cost of ethics, consistency, or clinical quality. Dr. Harper, thank you so much for joining us here at the expert panel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, a look at the main points that we're going to cover tonight. First, we're going to talk about the burnout in aesthetics and not just exhaustion, right? Oh. We're going to find out how to identify partners that truly match your values, and then we're going to go into the key due diligence steps, financial health, leadership synergy, and cultural fits, along with the common pitfalls in aesthetic mergers. And then, of course, how we're going to move forward and build, or rather, have a great merger or acquisition as well. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quickly. and we'll get into the main Q&A section. Right. My first question goes out to you, Dana. From an operator's lens, what systems must be in place before pursuing a merger or a second location to ensure growth doesn't outpace operational control?
I think it starts with identifying why you want to expand. If you're doing it just for the sake
Okay.
of saying that you're expanding versus you have an actual need or you're kind of bursting at the seams. But once you've identified that, it's understanding your business as a whole right now. Is it, as flawless as it can be? Is it turnkey? Can you take a step back and identify how it's operating? Are your financials all in line? Can you, take a step back and look how profitable you are, where your hiccups are? Can your team speak that same language? And then do you have a plan going into it? Who's going to own the growth? Who's going to own what roles? What needs to change? What needs to happen? How much capital you need to make that happen? Those are some of the main things that a lot of people don't think about. They just think, here's a shiny new opportunity. I get to say I have another location, and they kind of dive in, without planning or prepping any of that first. So without knowing, if you have that demand, do you have the supports for that? Do you have SOPs and documents? Could you bring someone on tomorrow and have them step into a role? Or is it, you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants and figuring it out day over day? Because if that's where your business is, then you need to kind of take a step back and get that first business in line before you start to expand. Because otherwise, it's going to really magnify the issues that you have. The further and further you spread
Okay.
out, the more locations you add.
Tell me what are the indicators that we have an appropriate amount of demand, or even the SOPs are strong enough to really
Mhm.
withstand a new expansion.
So when it comes to the SOPs, doing exercises like pulling somebody from a different department and having them try out a different role. Is there
All
enough
right.
documentation where that person can fill in, where they have enough systems in place to know what needs to happen? Look at your onboarding process. How long does it take you to get somebody onboarded and effective in their role? Also looking at your turnover rates. A lot of the reason why we lose admin team is because they feel really unprepared and people don't like feeling stupid in those roles. So how much do we
Mm,
have, to support them so that they get up to speed as quickly as possible? And then as far as demand goes, if your books are, pretty open and you're still, fighting to, retain your patients, you're, still trying to fill your books in the month every month, you're at 40% capacity and you still have 60% to go to fill, you know, we're just spreading out a problem when we haven't really figured out how to optimize, the systems and the providers that we have.
okay. Um, I would like to now move on to Dr. Harper. Dr. Harper, my question to you is from a medical director's perspective, what clinical and safety standards must be protected at all costs during mergers or multi-location expansions, and where do practice most often compromise unintentionally?
I think, excuse me, I think too often people don't care about the clinical.
Okay.
And so it's more about buying a business that generates revenue and doesn't even matter that it's clinical in nature. But I think
Hmm.
it can lead to some of the biggest challenges for acquiring. If there's a fundamental
Hmm.
disconnect or extreme level of individuality, provider to provider, practitioner to practitioner, if there's no standard set, then there's nothing to know how to protect through the
Hmm.
transition. And so if you have a standard of care, if you treat people a certain way, if a patient can come in and see any one of you, including yourself as the owner or another practitioner, and get a similar recommendation, then I would say that's a strong foundation for something that can be scaled. Um, I think too often when an acquisition occurs, if they have a fundamental different approach and you're not aware of that, they still want to maintain their level of it's almost autonomy. And so
Hmm.
sometimes those clinical standards can conflict, or they have extreme loyalty to something as trivial as a brand, but it does occur a lot where somebody
Hmm.
wants to use one brand of something and not this brand of this. And so you
Hmm.
run into um, either open conflict or quiet conflict. Quiet conflict's probably worse, where people just do their own thing and try to not have anybody notice. So I think
Hmm.
when it comes to protecting the safety of the patients or the ethics of how you treat or the quality of treatment, I think it has to be foundational. And I think that that poses is probably one of the active challenges for any of these kind of groups rolling up different practices is if they really look under the hood with of how treatments are being done. Personally, from a medical director perspective, I would want to see some synergy there.
Okay. Um, yeah, let's start with why you started with saying like, most of these mergers and acquisitions or expansions, they don't look at the clinical side of things. Why is it so? I mean, of course, it's obvious, but why is it so important for, the financial metrics for us to really care about the clinical side of the practice?
Well, I think the clinical providers are going to care about it. And so the
Hmm.
individuals within each team and their identity are tied to being a good provider. And so
Hmm.
it's not like building any other widget necessarily. It is highly specific and you have to have a high level of training. And so
Hmm.
if that training is not aligned, um, then the primary revenue generator of that business that you just acquired goes to zero, or they leave, or they become disenfranchised with it. And so maintaining that kind of deep dive look at clinical and making sure that it doesn't have to be exact, but it needs to be close enough that they can meld together without alienating anyone. Because if you
Hmm.
do that, almost all of this business is a service-based business, and so you lose basically all your revenue, and you can have a very different financial picture in 24 hours or less.
Right. And you mentioned extreme brand loyalty, right? Being a conflict of interest sometimes, perhaps it's open or quiet. How do you identify these quiet conflicts?
I think it's beneficial to know. I mean, that's where I think software plays a big role.
Hmm.
Um, and tracking each patient that comes in. The system we use has photos for every patient. You can see
Okay.
kind of what somebody's using in terms of products, and kind of keeping an eye on that is a way to see if somebody is fundamentally divergent, right? So you're trying to move everybody to this brand for it is a simple example, but you still have one
Hmm.
provider who's using 90% or 100% of this other brand, but they won't actively complain or they won't raise the question of why they're still being loyal to one thing versus another. So I think having
Okay.
some visibility into actually what's happening in each room, I think is
Hmm.
meaningful. As a medical director and doing supervision, I think that's a key step that's often not present at all in businesses. And I think that um, when people actually look into what's going on in their clinics, they're often disappointed. And reality versus belief are pretty different a lot of the times, and we can all be pretty deluded of what's actually happening. But I think the more you look in and you dive in and you actually do an audit periodically with people,
Hmm.
I think is really critical to try to find those outliers because somebody might not even knowingly be doing it. They might
Okay. Okay.
inconvenient just have never bought in or they don't believe they're being problematic. So just helping to identify those so that you can fix the ones that are fixable.
Okay. Um, Dana, back to you. Uh, Oh, before that, we have received communication from our third panelist, Robin, who was supposed to be here. Unfortunately, her flight got delayed, and I think she's currently in air. So that's why she has been unable to join us. So uh, we apologize on behalf
Understandable.
of Robin for that. Yeah. Dana, what are the most common operational breakdowns you see during post-merger integration, particularly with teams, workflows, and provider performance, along with how can leaders proactively prevent them? Go ahead, Dana.
I will say that to start with how it can be avoided is having a plan going into it and being transparent. A lot of the times there's a handful of people who know what's going on, and that's it. And then the core of the team is left to make assumptions. And that is
Mhm.
usually just the beginning of a very big cultural disaster. Because once people start to kind of, start the rumor mill and start, kind of getting together, then they let fear lead that conversation, which is never a good place to be. So I would say just going into it, knowing what's changing, who's changing, are we changing roles, are we changing any, of the positions, any of the ways that we do things, and being very open and honest about that. Because it's not so much that people are afraid of change, that they're afraid of the uncertainty, what it means for them. So if we can address that out of the gate, we can really sidestep some of the major issues. A lot of the things that I see, however, are cultural breakdowns. There becomes this hierarchy of, us versus them, the people that have been there from the beginning versus the people that are coming in. Then, it makes it really hard for, new systems, and not so much that we need to change the culture, but, as we expand and as we grow, we will be taking on new elements of culture. And it makes it really, really hard when we have that like really hard line because they feel like they need to protect themselves or they need to protect their patients or whatever it is in their head that they've kind of come up with. Um, if there's going to be any change in leadership, they need to
Yeah.
know what that looks like. Are we putting in different managers? Are we putting in, supervisors who reports directly to who and why? Always
Mhm.
kind of explaining the why behind what's changing is also very important because if somebody doesn't agree with what's going on and you haven't given them a purpose or a why behind it, again, they're going to fill that in. And you don't want
Mhm.
that to be the narrative that your team is, because again, they may say it amongst themselves, but your patients will feel that when they walk in the door. If there's any sort of tension, if there's any sort of disconnect, it doesn't create the best patient experience. And again, if you have a provider that is maybe a little bit immature or unaware of, emotional intelligence, you don't know what they're saying in the room to the patients, which is also a risk that we don't want to take if we don't have to. Um, so it's just if there's going to be a change in processes, making sure that we have communicated that, we've trained the team on that, we've given them every opportunity to really wrap their arms around it, and they know where to go to find that information, giving them, ownership of the why, giving them ownership of their role, and also telling them where we're going and why this merger is happening to begin with, because that's also a big part of it. A lot of providers and team members don't see the bigger picture. It was good enough as it is. Why are we changing things? Why are we, adding this element that is making my life harder? So when we really break down what's in it for them, what this means, where we're going, and the big picture for them, for the patients, and for the practice, you really sidestep any major issues.
Okay. So, a lot of things there, but particularly what I want to touch on is the culture, the new culture coming in and versus the old. What is the ideal process of merging those cultures in, not just the business, right? What's the
Getting a
ideal
real,
process look like?
I would say getting a really clear picture of what the current culture is and what
Okay.
really drives the team, what they're, what gets them out of bed, what gets them coming in and really operating, well and taking care of the patients. And then really explaining to them how we're not trying to take their culture away. We're just trying to enhance it and tying the new cultural elements to their existing one and how it's going to expand it. But having a very open conversation about it in giving everybody the chance to voice their concerns, voice their opinions. That way, everyone feels heard and really can embrace it. And unfortunately, it also gives you an opportunity to identify who should come along for the ride and who might need to no longer be employed with you.
Okay. Dana, just one last follow-up over there. A lot of leaders feel that disclosing certain information, especially, when it comes to a merger or like high-level
Mhm.
strategic um, actions to their team members, might feel like they're not ready to handle this information, right? Perhaps that's one of the reasons they don't disclose as much as they should. how would you address such a concern?
I would ask, is it that you're afraid that the team can't handle it, or are you afraid to have the conversation? Because a lot of the times it comes down to having that difficult conversation and giving people answers that they may not want to hear. But
Mm-hmm.
it's making it bite sized. It's giving them the information that directly pertains to them. It's how does
Mm,
this affect you? How does this affect your role? What does this mean for us in the next 30, 60, 90 days? They don't need to be privy to, the ins and outs of every, finite detail. And they shouldn't be. There should be things that they are unaware of because sometimes information does need to remain confidential. But when it comes to the stability of their role and
mm.
how this is going to impact them, the longer you wait to tell them, the more of a distrust there will be, and it's going to make it much harder to win them over. And treating people like adults tends to
Yeah,
to end much better than kind of treating them like they can't handle it.
got you. Thank you very much for that data. Really appreciate that. Um, Dr. Harper, how do you structure provider training and oversight when scaling across locations to ensure consistent outcomes, protocols, and ethical decision making?
I think the foundation of that is probably making that decision that you're going to do that. Um, I think that because I think to maintain it is difficult. It requires work, and sometimes you have to make decisions that reinforce the fact that you're going to use ethical decision making. If you have somebody who's not willing to do that, I think you have to be willing to protect your values, even at financial loss potentially. And I think that too often, when push comes to shove in difficult situations, or you almost don't have a provider for a location kind of thing, people compromise too often, and or get held hostage is kind of how I describe it. And I think that that is the erodes the foundation of everything else. Um, when it comes to training, I think that you have to know how to train somebody in each thing. So if you don't know the process, I know everybody wants to be an artist, but if you can't articulate specifically what you do or why, then it's really hard for somebody else to do that. And so I think that going through the effort of training even a single person and documenting it and writing it down, I think is a key first step. Um, and that process can improve over time, but you have to have some process in place. Uh, uh, I I train all of our people in my training team. We have a training team and a provider manager, and we train everybody the same way, so that we know that everybody's been trained the exact same way. We have the same approach to our consultations, the same approach to treatment. Not necessarily because that's the very best way to do it, but because you have to have something you can actually standardize. And so
Okay.
if there's a difference of opinion, um, I welcome that, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
don't want somebody just to on their own implement it, right? Raise the question, we'll
Mm-hmm.
all evaluate it. If it's good enough to do and it's proven, then it's good enough for all of us to do and change. And so just maintaining a standard of care and like a specific way that you do everything, I think is the foundation of that. And then having a written training, maybe even LMS if you have the resources to do so. Um, Having a training team if you're not able to do all your training yourself. And then I again comes back to also keeping the line open. And so I also train people um, one time per week, every week. So training is
Okay.
never done. So my team, we do a call with all locations and we train for an hour at least once a week, every week, ongoing. So people who've been here for 3 or 4 years have gone through, 3 years of weekly training. So, and I think you get something different out of it every time. So I think the nature of this business is skill and service, and so I don't think training will ever end.
Talk to me about that training once a week. What's in it?
So it differs based on what we need to accomplish. So I do like to
Mhm.
start from scratch and just train
Okay.
basics, foundational stuff, treatments, and go through almost the same curriculum over and over again, because
Okay.
the team changes or the what somebody was able to understand the first time they didn't. maybe realize. We train things like consultation, managing difficult patients, managing complications. We everything that we train in a clinic, we also train or touch on in that meeting. So um, I feel like there's sometimes we're scratching our heads as to what to train on, but there's almost always a topic. And then we have
Hmm.
an active dialogue with all of our clinical providers. And so just it's really easy. We can even go back to cases, case review, difficult things, sharing good before and afters, how they accomplished it, making sure that we're all on the same page, and that everybody's at the same level of education.
Okay. What I'm understanding there, Dr. Harper, is this training, it's almost like a weekly meeting. I mean, but what's the one difference between a weekly meeting and this training? Is it the fact that
It's
everyone is
structured as a
aware
training.
that, mm,
Yeah, so it's structured as a training. So it's not necessarily a meeting in that and we're covering topics and everybody's discussing. It's we're gonna learn about this week, or we're gonna learn about this topic, and we have drawings and anatomy and pictures and treatment markings, and sometimes we even do live where we're injecting or doing something and it's being filmed. So it's the equivalent as close to an in-person training as we can get, while
mhm,
being in all of our clinics at all simultaneously.
right. And just to wrap things out over here, you mentioned way early on that you need to decide on where you stand with regards to ethics. How are you bringing ethics into your training or your team members? Is that a separate conversation or is it more,
Yeah, so
how
it
does that
starts at
look
the
like?
interview process. Um,
Okay.
and I believe pretty strongly in value-based assessments and trying to find out what motivates people as much as we can. We try to weed people out who don't have the same values
Okay.
through the interview process. Um, and we're not afraid to cut ties with a member who's not willing to do that. How it
Hmm.
relates to ethical treatment is we say no all the time with certain
Hmm.
treatments we'll do or not do. And
Hmm.
while we do have financial benchmarks and metrics that we're trying to achieve, our providers are not 100% compensated on selling because I think
Okay.
that creates a misalignment where you're saying that you value something else other than selling, but then you're only compensating based on selling. There's a hypocrisy there that doesn't seem to play out. Um,
Absolutely.
and so coming up with some of those cases or why you would say no, or that you always have the right to say no. Like I'm not going to ever be upset for making a good clinical or ethical decision.
Mm.
I might be if you sell an extra syringe of lips for no reason, just because you want to hit some financial benchmark.
Mhm. Got it. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Harper. So before we move on to the next question, I have a quick message from our sponsor I would like to share. So, uh, I've got a gift from Echo Marketing for everyone here tonight, a complimentary one-on-one marketing strategy meeting. Here's the question they will answer for you. When someone in your city searches for Botox near me or Morpheus 8 cost or even lip filler before and after, are you the practice that gets found, trusted, and chosen? Patient demand today is treatment specific, and AI-driven results are reshuffling who shows up first. That's why your growth now depends on three things working together: be found, be trusted, and be chosen. In your session, an equa strategist will do a live audit of your marketing position and give you a treatment level visibility plan designed to attract more qualified consults for injectables, lasers, body contouring, whatever you're selling. It's immediately actionable, no fluff. These sessions do fill up fast because our team does real pre-work for every audit. So if growth is on your radar for the, 2026, this 45-minute session will be the best use of your time. Scan the QR code or use the link in the chat. It'll take under a minute to reserve. It's completely no obligation. You leave with a clear roadmap you can implement with us, your team, or in-house. Go ahead and book your session now. So next time patients search for those treatments, they find you. There we go. So Dana, how should aesthetic leaders evaluate leadership synergy and decision-making alignment during due diligence beyond resumes and titles?
I think having your established core values of what the business stands for, first and foremost, is essential. Knowing what it is that you stand for and what you're trying to uphold, aside from just your culture, but these are who we are. Here are the pillars. This is what makes us what we are, and then putting them through different real scenarios that test that. If
Mhm.
integrity is one of those, giving them, a scenario to walk you through how they would handle a situation with an employee that can kind of go either way, and getting a real sense of their thought process of how they handle these situations. Also getting a sense of, what their leadership style is, more so than just asking, what is your leadership style? Because everyone will tell you, I'm here for my team. I have an open door policy. You'll hear the same crap over and over again. It's really getting down to the core of like, okay, well, walk me through what that means. Give me an example
Mhm.
of that. If we're interviewing somebody brand new, give me some references of past team members that we can reach out to and talk to them about your strategies, really pushing them on how well did they know their metrics in places that they've worked in the past. Can they walk you through where they went wrong, what they would do differently? Can they take ownership, or is it, that they're kind of passing the blame? If you're putting them through that scenario of, give me an example of a time that you didn't achieve something, and they immediately go into, well, at my last job I couldn't do this, or they didn't give me the budget for this, or this, that, or the other. And it's all about what they didn't have. Well, guess what? In 3 months, if you bring them on, the narrative's going to be about all the things that you're not providing them. And
Mhm.
then also using tools, things like culture index or, personality assessments can also show you, what their core traits are, what they're wired for, if they have those things that really make up somebody who's going to be successful in the role that you want them to play. Um, and also really identifying what that role looks like. Are you looking for somebody who's more of a data and a systems manager? Are you looking for somebody who's more of a culture and people manager? And making that very, very clear from, step one. Here's your expectation. Here's what I expect from you. And then how can they deliver that, and really putting their feet to the fire. Also call references. Nobody calls references. Call references.
Yeah. Take us through a scenario of what are some of the questions that you may ask if we are calling for a reference.
If I'm calling past teammates, or past employees of theirs for reference, just getting a sense of, where they felt the most supported. Would they come back to work for this person? Would they send someone that they love to work for this person? What really stood out to them and where they think that this person has room for improvement. If I'm calling, a past employer, you're a little bit limited as to, what you can ask from, a legality standpoint, but, would they hire them again? Was it a loss to the business, not having them there? What were the things that they felt they did the best? Usually when you ask, would you hire them again? That'll that'll give you a pretty clear indication if there's any sort of hesitation or, you know, pause there. But when you're asking about the team, especially if we want to make sure that they're going to, align with our culture and kind of protect that, that can be really eye-opening. Or if they can't even provide you with those references, that's also very
Mm.
telling.
Indeed, indeed. Now, you mentioned, I'm just curious about the decision-making process, right? Now, you mentioned
Mhm,
hiring for the different roles and
mhm,
how you need to consider those things.
mhm.
Um, I'm just wondering, what is the absolute green flag for such, a leadership role applied?
Somebody who is very self-aware. They know what their strengths are. They know what their challenges are, because we all have them. But they know what they need to work on. They know what they need to implement. They're very, very aware of, you know, how to operate the business. They know the ins and the outs of it, and they can give you real specific examples of it. You know, not just something that they looked up on ChatGPT 5 minutes before they walked in. Like as you start to get past layer 1, 2, and 3 of those questions, they have
Mm.
tangible, you know, conversations that they can have with you about it. It's, you know, it's not just one word answers. It's, oh, let me tell you about a time that I did this, and you know, really can walk you through their thought process, which will also show you the kind of communicator that they are.
Right, right, which is also very crucially
Absolutely.
important.
For so many levels, you want to make sure
Right,
that they can communicate with the team, but also that they're communicating with you.
right. And you're comfortable with that too.
Absolutely.
Right, right. Thank you very much for that, Dana. Um, Dr. Harper, during due diligence, what clinical red flags should physician owners look for when evaluating a potential partner or acquisition?
This is a potentially long list, so I'll try to keep it short. Um, from a little bit of the management side of things, if you have a staff who's been entirely non-managed, um,
Hmm.
so if somebody can't show you any kind of formal review, formal feedback,
Mm,
if
mm,
nobody's ever been fired or
mm,
if there's been no active like guidance or coaching, um,
mm,
it's hard to introduce that to somebody. So
mm.
if I would say if they can't show any of that, I think and it's probably not something that people would normally look for in due diligence, but I would want to
Yeah.
see that employees have been actively managed in some way. Um,
Mm,
I would say in extreme individualism. So there are some groups out there, and they'll remain nameless, but I know that if you go to this famous provider at this clinic and this other famous provider at this other clinic, all within the same chain, they're going to be fundamentally different recommendations,
mm,
and they may even talk bad about one another. And so I
mm,
would say if you have kind of like a business within a business, right? It's more of
mhm,
an individual running their own business that just happens to be located in the other business. I think
uh-huh,
that would be a pretty big red flag. Um, if you have
mhm,
any weird arrangements or weird deals with people, or somebody who gets a different set of compensation or a different set of rules than the other team members, I think that's another pretty big red flag for many things. One,
mm,
they're almost like peace offerings usually that are given
mm,
to keep somebody, which doesn't mean they're going to stay or that you're going to want to make those same concessions. Two, it speaks
yeah.
to poor leadership and a failure to maintain consistency. Consistency and quality are very, very difficult. It's a very active
Mhm,
process to maintain that all the time. So if they don't have that, I think it's problematic. Um, rep-
mhm,
Anything that they represent, or if they use external metrics of skill, like, hey, I'm an
mhm.
Allergan trainer, or I'm
Okay.
ranked this with some nonsense arbitrary thing. Um, those are indications that they are very not confident. Um, and people who are very uh, what's the word? Um, Insecure. There we go. Are going to
Okay.
try to validate and find ways to prove why they weren't good. So it's problematic
Mm,
when somebody has a really high self worth. They
mhm,
run a very bad business, and you come in and
mm,
fix it because it can't
mm,
possibly be that they were not good at running the business. It has to be something else. So there'll be a lot of fault
mhm,
finding. Um, if they don't have a system to justify or prove their return rates, their retention
mhm,
rates, um, for example, I purchased a practice from an owner who said he had extreme highly high retention, 80, 90% retention. Once we actually took them off paper and put them on a system, he had less than 10% retention. Um, so those types of representations or paper charting or anything that makes it difficult to actually figure out or validate any of the statements. Yes, you can have a legal document that they have to attest their representations are true and accurate, but in reality, when you dive in and you start finding these, they're very problematic to fix. And so it's just leads to a lot of problems that are completely unnecessary. And then I would try, if you're really trying to validate clinically, I would try to watch them or see what they do, see how they do consultations, see how they treat, um, and make sure that you don't have somebody who's too cavalier with it, because I think that leads, it exposes you to risk. Um, it speaks to other ways in how they run the practice. So if they don't have consents, right? If they're not buttoned up from a regulatory perspective and everybody isn't on the same page during due diligence, to get
Mm.
everybody onto that same page, you're then the bad guy. And
Yeah.
my goal for a successful acquisition would be try to be the bad guy as little as possible, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're trying to find those red flags beforehand, those are just
Hmm.
some helpful ways to do it.
Absolutely. They're incredible list right there. But one of the things I wanted a bit of clarification is when it comes to, that allergen trainer or the one who specializes in a certain product, that provider. Um, you said that shows they're, insecure. I didn't completely understand that. Can you elaborate a
Yeah,
little
let
bit
me.
on that?
So I've found that somebody who's very secure and confident is
Hmm.
very unnerving to somebody who's insecure. So if they
Okay.
lead with external metrics of success, right?
Hmm.
I'm an allergen trainer to justify they know what they're doing clinically, or
Okay.
um, we're top whatever. So, for example, I purchased some practices where they represented, oh, we're top three or whatever with allergen. Come to find out, they
Hmm.
were sharing purchasing with other groups, but external um, credentialing that's not in no way tied to actual real work or real clinical expertise, I think I would look at it as somebody who you probably need to do a little bit more due diligence on. So it's not,
Gotcha.
I know a lot of great people who are those things. They typically don't introduce themselves with those initially. Um,
Yeah.
and then if you dive in, they have a lot of substance to prove otherwise. I
Mm.
think those are just things that tip me off that I need to understand better what's going on.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. Thanks for the clarification, Dr. Harper.
Mhm.
Dana, back to you. When expanding across locations and partners, how do you standardize systems and KPIs without stripping away local ownership, culture, or clinical autonomy?
I think it starts by identifying what that culture is. Really, what is the heartbeat of the practice? What makes it so wonderful? And then really breaking down what those KPIs do to protect the culture and enhance it. If your
Mhm.
team is really in it for the practice, they're in it for the growth, creating these systems and implementing, structure to track and then ultimately grow the business is not going to deter them. It's actually going to reinforce it, but giving them a direct correlation. We're tracking the patient experience and the patient retention because we want to make sure that we're serving the patients to the best of our ability, which speaks directly to our culture. So when we tie it back to the why and how it goes into what they're already doing, it really just kind of reinforces it versus stripping it. But it does also identify the people who aren't protecting the culture and that aren't a part of it. So it does weed out those problematic, children kind of quickly. It's making sure that you're not afraid to remove them. I know sometimes
Mm.
it can be we're afraid, tribal knowledge, like they know everything, they've been here so long, all of these things. But if you've got somebody who's acting, kind of like a cancer within the practice, and you've got 90% of the team bought in, but this person is really actively against everything. They're trying to, make us do all this more, all this work now, and now we have to do all of these reports and do all of these things. It can really turn the rest of the team very, very quickly. So it's better to kind of operate, at a loss of a person while we're finding that right fit versus having that person that's tearing apart everything that you are putting in place. But I have found historically, again, when we communicate with our team, when we're transparent and we give them the why behind it, it really actually, they get almost excited to track it and to see the growth.
Okay, that's for the cultural part. What about ownership and clinical autonomy?
So for the clinical autonomy, it's the same thing. It's, going back to the core of why they're doing what they're doing. Are they doing it ethically? Does it align with, the bigger practice altogether? And by tracking these, we're just ensuring that we're protecting the provider, we're protecting the practice, and we're protecting the patient. So if anyone is afraid of that, again, it's kind of
Mm.
that same red flag. And all of these are in place to protect the overall long-term growth of the business itself. So it's not by any means stripping anything away. It's giving them the power to really wrap their arms around it and know that if we do these things and we watch these things and we, move the needle where we need to, I get to have a job in, 6 months, a year, 2 years versus, hey, I'm not sure that we're even going to make enough money this month to cover payroll. So it actually gives you the ability to be very present in the business and to be, more in control of it, which also takes away a lot of that stress and that heaviness that sits on your chest.
Right. And at any given moment, do you ever give them the opportunity or say you can, like, if things aren't going well here, or even if things are going really well here, you have the opportunity to, if you learn these procedures, the SOPs, and you are at the standard, you can go to the other location perhaps if you're interested. Does that ever come up
Absolutely.
in the conversation?
Of course, absolutely. Because as you're growing and as you're expanding, there's always going to be a need for people to step into bigger roles. So having that complete ownership of it, having somebody who can, really understand it, can really explain that to people, now we can move them into training roles, into supervisor roles, into somebody who, can really kind of grow outside of their position, which when we're talking about more so the front desk, because that tends to be the most transient role that we have in a practice. But when we can give that,
Hmm.
some more depth, when we can give somebody, a career path in that, and it's not this one note transactional position, now we see a lot more engagement. We see a lot more, passion, a lot more attention, and, and you feel that all the way through.
Right. The front desk transient role, is that a problem?
It tends to be, of the roles that I see have the highest turnover, the front desk usually is because they're paid on the lower end. They deal with the
Hmm.
bulk of the problems. If the practice isn't run well, if there's not standard operating procedures in place, if the team isn't aligned, they're the ones that are getting the phone call. They're the ones that are getting yelled at. If a provider's running 30 minutes behind because they're not communicating or they're kind of doing whatever they want in the back, or they didn't want to stop looking at their phone long enough to come get the patient, it's the front desk that takes the brunt of that. And so there's only so much that someone's willing to take, again, for a role that they don't see a long-term future in. Um, and then they're looking for their next role, kind of immediately. So you do see a pretty high turnover, especially in practices that aren't operated well.
And when there is a good retention of the front desk, is that some sort of a strong indicator of a well-run practice?
Absolutely, and a really strong culture. When there's that consistency and you're not seeing that turnover, at the front desk or really in any of the roles, it really just speaks to the fact that they enjoy coming to their job. It's something that is not stressful for them. It's not, impacting their mental health. They're not taking it home with them. They enjoy being a part of it, and in turn, they get to give that back to the practice as well. If we motivate people and we inspire them, they do so much more for us, and they go that extra mile and they stay, and and they're happy to be a part of it. But if we see sort of this revolving door where it's, within a year, we've got a new front desk person every 6 months, the patients notice it. There's usually, a systems breakdown. It does, affect, booking rates, retention rates, because every time there's somebody new and they're not doing something correctly or they're not answering the phone the right way, you'll see your lead conversions dropping off. So it does impact the practice in kind of a major way.
Got you. Well, Dana, thank you so much for that explanation. Dr. Harper, how can physician leadership maintain patient trust and brand credibility during periods of rapid expansion, especially when new providers and locations are introduced?
Um, I think it goes back to almost like setting a standard, also deciding
Mm,
that, again, this goes contrary to most physicians, um, setting the standard that the brand is more important than their name. Um,
mm,
so I think if you set out to build a brand, you approach it differently than if you set out to build your name or your reputation. And I understand there's a time and a place to do both. Um, and early on, they're probably not distinguishable, right? So when you're the only employee and building your brand, you are your brand effectively. As you hire, as you bring in other providers, I think making sure that patients know that you're actively, and I would say not just think that you're actively involved, but I think to actually be involved. Um, because I think too often people want this like, oh, I'm run by, I can think of a national thing that was like, we're affiliated with this person who's probably never been into one of those locations ever, right? Um, and so I think that there's the negative side of that, but I think the positive side is you can kind of vouch your credibility into the brand. I'm going to actively contribute. I still come up with the protocols. I still involved with training so that as the messaging goes out and for the providers treating another office, if they have an issue, they can ask me the question. And so just making sure that you're kind of still involved as much as possible, and still trying to set the tone and set that example. Um, and then avoiding things that erode your brand, right? So, and this
mhm,
is super controversial. So if I have each provider and I expect them to be ultra famous on social media as an individual, it's
yeah,
really difficult to have that in combination with a strong brand because they are the brand
mhm,
and they've built that individualized brand. It's really difficult to maintain that as part of like the bigger brand because if they leave
mm,
and all of the trust is built into that one individual and there's no trust or no equity built with the brand, um, it
mm,
doesn't translate very well at all. And I don't think you actually have a brand if there's no, if somebody can't go to somebody else in the same brand and expect a similar outcome. I think that's where
mhm,
you see how strong a brand is. Um, I also think that, I don't know, simple things that I like to do is when patients ask me how I get treated or who treats me, I don't say myself because I don't do that. My
oh,
same people in my clinics treat me because if they're good enough to treat you, they're also good enough to treat me. Um,
mm,
and so having that trust in your team, um, and I encourage people to see different providers within the practice, not always go back to the same one, and diversify
mm,
based on offerings, so that somebody might get familiar with multiple people in the brand, and once they
mhm,
have, for better or for worse, having gone through some turnover in some of the locations, there's a number of
mm,
patients you'll lose. Um, but once they stick to the brand rather than the provider, it proves that you have something more meaningful to continue to build on.
right. And with regards to that conflict of interest, with that influencer, the social media influencer persona within the brand, what's what's the ideal way to go about it? Like, are you asking them not to post on social media, or
It's
do
an
you have a
impossible
different approach?
question, with a lot of different answers. I've tried it
Yeah.
many, many different ways, most of the ways I've heard of. And I've
Hmm.
been burned in almost every instance. So my approach is
Yeah.
much less, um, I don't expect anything of them, right? I don't expect them
Okay.
to, I don't put that weight on them. I don't like,
Yeah.
I expect them to contribute to training. Can expect them to continue contribute to education. And we do provide things
Mm.
and we do work, but we all share all of our stuff through the same branded channel. Um,
Yeah.
I've heard of other people who, and what you trade off, I think, is important. So with that, you
Mm.
don't get the same level of engagement with your team.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
if you happen to have somebody who's like a more viral star in your group, you don't grow maybe as fast. But
Yeah.
the negatives outweigh the positives for me, and I would much rather
Mm.
have consistent, stable like growth in brand rather than
Mm.
uh, maximum revenue all the time.
Okay, got you. Um, yeah. With that being said, what, like, in your opinion, as well as in your experience, really, what has been the ideal way to build your brand, considering your multi-location practice on social media?
So I think it's a little bit. So I think if we just take off of social media initially, I think when you
Okay.
expand within a certain geographic distance, you capitalize on the
Mm.
fact that you have brand equity. Your name is probably
Yeah.
out there wide enough that you then just start to leverage off of that. When you expand
Mm.
probably more than an hour or more than a
Mm.
state, then you have almost
Mm.
no brand equity. It's just like building a
Mm.
completely novel clinic where whether there's any value at all, I'm not sure, other
Yeah.
than the fact that you've had to learn how to build a brand. So
Mm.
marketing and all of that stuff still contributes. I've tried different things on social media. For a while, we had one account per provider. We've had one account
Mhm.
per clinic. Um, and at a point where I had two graphic designers and a third editor, and we were putting out a few hundred pieces of content a day. Um,
Yeah. Oh, wow.
and that was, probably a different time of social media. But
Yeah.
I think now for me, we've consolidated it down to a single account. Um, we don't have a whole bunch of spin-off things just because of dilution of attention. And if we can't do
Yeah.
one well, then we can't do 10 any better. Um,
Gotcha.
so, and then I think the geotagging and having a focus on each market I think is really
Hmm.
important. And, local SEO, all that kind of stuff. I'm a big proponent of SEO, even though I don't think it'll be so important in the future. And I just
Yeah.
think learning how to build that reputation through, as if you're a brand new clinic with nobody knowing about you, I think is not that
Okay.
different than
Hmm.
building a multi-location brand. The steps are the same. You just have
Mm.
to do it a little more organized.
Got you. Uh, Now we have almost reached the top of the hour. Just to wrap things out, I would like to get the golden nugget of this conversation from both of y'all. What do you think is the key takeaway here? Dana, what do you think?
I think it's about consistency and systems and structure. Everyone thinks that expanding and doing all this is, exciting and it's sexy and it's this, but it really at the core of it to be successful comes down to getting back to the basics, having a mission, a vision statement, having all of your systems buttoned up, having your culture buttoned up, and also knowing where you're taking it before you dive in and
Mm.
just, decide to figure it out along the way.
Right.
Um,
Um, yeah, go ahead, Dr. Harper.
oh, you're good. I'll let you. Well,
Sorry?
I was just going to respond with mine, but you had a follow-up point, so I'll let you go for that first.
No, 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 no. I was going to switch to you, Dr. Harper.
Okay,
Over to
got it.
you.
So for me, I think the consistency and real systems. I really like the point earlier that you should be able to step away before you need to expand. And people ask me all the
Hmm.
time, why do I need to expand? How do I expand? And I always ask if it doesn't fit your goal with what you're trying to build, then don't expand, because the difficulty is far greater, um, and there's not until you go through a significant time period where there's less profitability, it's not actually more financially beneficial either, in the short term. So I would say just make sure that it's consistent with your goals. And then the last point would be if you're going through due diligence. and you're trying to work out a partnership or you're trying to work out some kind of growth strategy, you have to prove it, is kind of our words. You can't take anybody's word for anything. You have to be able to see it all firsthand to the extent you can, because too often, I wish it were less common, but almost everything that somebody told me is true is not. And so I just don't, it's not that you shouldn't trust, but you should verify everything.
There we go. Well, that being said, I would like to extend a very thankful. I'm very thankful for Dana Hatch, Dr. Justin Harper, and just for joining us and really letting us have it, all the insights, the experience that you have spoken about here tonight. I really hope our attendees uh, take away a lot of value from that. And yeah, just a quick couple of reminders. The marketing strategy meeting with ECMO Marketing is still available in the chat there. If you want to see growth in 2026, make use of that. It's completely complimentary and no obligation. And then, of course, uh, a small feedback survey will be popping up as you exit this session. It'll take around 30 seconds to fill up. If you do, that'll be much appreciated. It'll just help us really refine these events and get the panelists that you need for the topics that you want for us to discuss. And of course, with that being said, really appreciate our attendees for spending this hour with us and investing into your practice's future. On behalf of the Business of Aesthetics, I'm your host, Dana Disha. It has been a pleasure. Thank you very much and wish you a wonderful week ahead. Until next time, take care.